Hi Blood Bowl fans, King Ghidra here, and we've taken the lights down low today because in this video we're going to talk about the dark art of stalling. Now, why do I call it a dark art? Well, that's because stalling tends to evoke quite strong emotions in a number of people in the Blood Bowl community, many of whom think that it is very much against the spirit of the game. And I do have some sympathy for that point of view, but on this channel we tend to lean more towards the competitive aspect of this board game. And so what I want to talk about in this video is what is stalling, why do we stall, and give a little bit of example of the how we stall, and also as an opponent what you can do if your opponent tries to stall against you. Now, speaking of a lack of illumination, stalling actually had quite a light shone on it recently as information started to leak about the new second season edition of Blood Bowl, because it was revealed that there were some new rules that defined stalling and also seemed to have some mechanisms for perhaps preventing it. Now, what that turned out to be was a single item on the prayers to Nuffle table, which meant that the chance of seeing the stall prevention mechanic is very, very slim in any given game of Blood Bowl. But what it did do, interestingly, was give us our first ever official definition of the stalling concept in the Blood Bowl rules. Now, obviously, a lot of thought's gone into the official definition of stalling. Interestingly, I, some time ago, was putting together an article about stalling long before this had ever occurred, and I had gone with the definition of simply when you can score without rolling any dice and you choose not to, which is very, very similar in many ways to how Games Workshop have now defined it. And the important thing here is that there are a number of seemingly easy ways of preparing to score and not scoring that still require you to roll dice, that still involve maybe purposely taking your time and not going through with the action, but don't meet those particular criteria of stalling. So, for example, something like hanging an elf thrower very deep in your own half whilst creating some kind of screen or cage deep in your opposition half, and knowing that at some point you're going to run the thrower up and sling the ball and then score on that particular turn. Now, the chance of your action failing might be fairly slim, but still a chance. You've still got to roll at least a throw and a catch, if not any other dice that might be involved. And so that doesn't meet the criteria for stalling, even though it is also a very popular tactic for a lot of teams. Similarly, if you're just kind of slowly grinding your way down the field, bashing your opponent with your orcs or your undead or whatever it is, this is not what we really mean by stalling. Even if you know that you expect that to take 8 turns or whatever, that's not stalling at all either. Stalling is very much about creating a situation where you are almost defending your opponent's end zone. You've flipped the field, you've created a position where you can walk into the end zone at a time of your choosing, and you are going to set up in such a way so as to make that position secure and keep that option open to you for as long as possible. Obviously, your opponent is going to be doing whatever they can to prevent that, typically. So that's really what this video is about, is why do we create situations like that? How do we create situations like that? And from the opposition perspective, what can we do to try and break down situations like that and force the score or prevent the score? So if stalling is controversial, why do we want to do it? Why shouldn't we just try and score as soon as we can and as often as possible? That sounds like a good way to win the game, right? This comes down to a subject that I covered in my first video, which is game management. The best way to succeed and win at Blood Bowl is to manage the game, to score when you want, and to either prevent your opponent from scoring or to create a situation in which they are forced or feel forced to score at a time of your choosing. The most commonly seen version of that is to take all 8 turns of your half to perform your score, leaving your opponent with only 1 turn to make theirs. And then when it's their drive to, create a situation in which they have to score in 4 or 5 turns or don't score at all. And you're able to then make a counter score in the remaining time. For that reason, time management is a very, very important skill in this game. Now, this is also a tactic which lends itself more towards certain races than others. For example, for certain kinds of slower bashing teams like Dwarves or Orcs, they don't have necessarily a great deal of choice in terms of making quick scores because their movement allowance is quite low, and to score in a fairly risk-free fashion, the most likely way of doing that is to create some kind of grinding cage down the field, and that takes a considerable amount of time to score. It's not likely that you can play in that way and get a score in less than 4, 5, 6 turns, and very often even longer depending on the opposition you're facing. So the extent to which teams like that are able to stall is far more limited because they don't really have a quick score option. Now, for a number of other teams, and certainly the most obvious ones are things like Skaven or Elves, scoring is a breeze. You can score in 2 turns, 3 turns, absolutely no problem at all. So for those teams, the decision about when to score becomes a far more realistic and flexible decision for them to consider on a turn-by-turn basis. And for that reason, those races are generally more prevalent when it comes to making decisions about stalling. That said, another common situation in which stalling can occur is when a team such as a basher, either through causing large amount of casualties at the beginning of the game or through attrition over the course of the game, finds themselves heavily outnumbering their opponent to the extent that they're able to make far more rapid, safe progress up the field, and are then in a very similar position about being able to score at will.
So we're going to look here at an example of an elf stall. This example is actually being performed by my opponent in a recent NAF online tournament game. I'm here as the undead. My opponent with high elves slightly fortunately got a blitz on the kickoff and was able to catch the ball, as you can see there. And he's already set up, attempting to do his best job he can of guarding and screening me off. He then gets a little bit fortunate as I suffer some bad luck in my very next turn and am not able to position at all. So he immediately decides this is a great opportunity for him to try and stall for this half. And as we can see here, he now advances, and it's very obvious to me as well as the opponent here that he is trying to stall. He's set up a double layered screen, and it would be very easy for him to score here, but it's obvious to everyone involved that this is a perfect opportunity to try and stall for as long as possible and really ruin my half. And you can see as he progresses here, I, as the opponent, my aim here is pretty simple. I outstrength him. I'm capable of doing quite a lot of damage, so I'm going to try and base him up. I'm going to try and box him in. I need to restrict his movement. I want to try and create as many opportunities as possible for me to do damage to try and dissuade him from stalling any longer than he's able to. I know he can score at any time. That's a kind of a secondary concern at this point, but as the defender now, as I am on my own drive, I'm really just trying to give him the toughest proposition, where to make him feel that he can't stall because he'll take too much damage, or maybe just give me a shot at the ball if he overextends. As you can see, he does a really good job. He pushes my players away, he dodges away, all great things, things that elves are great at, and he repositions, and he's actually quite compact at this point, which typically should, again, give me a chance to repeat that same exercise, to try and base him up, to try and do some damage, try and put some pressure on. And as you can see, I start to crowd in around here, and at the same time, I'm conscious that he could try and move the play to another part of the field. And I do my best to get numbers over into the middle to try and dissuade him from doing that. As you can see, I've got a stunned ghoul in the end zone there, which unfortunately doesn't help. And then consequently, he does exactly what I'm afraid of, and he flips a very large part of his team into the middle and to the top edge of the pitch, which now means that my much slower players are now a long way away from the ball. He's doing a really good job of keeping me at an arm's length and keeping his options open so that he can continue the stall. And again, as we push on, you can see I start to now try and apply pressure and box him in on the other side of the pitch. And at this point, I'm starting to do a little bit of damage. I've got a couple of his players knocked down, and I'm basing them so that they can't join in the play again. But he's still got a strong position here where I am nowhere near the ball, even though I'm trying to apply pressure on all of those players that he's got who are screening out. And then finally, this is just after my turn on turn 7, sorry. And I've got into him a little bit more here. I did a serious injury to one of his catchers. I've got a lot of bodies around the ball. I've got into his attempts to screen. And at this point, he decided finally that, enough was enough. And he scored on his turn 7. So I think this is a really nice job by Fode here, my opponent. He saw an opportunity. He positioned really well. He took advantage of his team strengths, which is, that mobility, the agility to escape away from my attempts to base him up. He was able to set an edge and reposition and use the full length of the goal line to extend the stall out for more turns than he would have if he'd just stayed boxed up in that one corner. So I think this was a really good illustration both of the power of elf stalling, just how many turns they can eat up just by shuffling around, creating screens, and then ultimately using the ability to flip the play and extend it even longer. And also just of how you need to try and counter that. You might say perhaps not very effectively on my side, but I really just tried to keep that pressure, keep him boxed in. It's as shown, it's a very, very difficult job with elves.
So hopefully you now all know what stalling is, why we stall, and maybe have a bit of a better idea about how we might stall and perhaps how we stop our opponents stalling against us. To go back to the original point at the top of the video, I certainly do understand why some people perceive this to be a negative aspect of the game, and I definitely think there are circumstances normally when you've bashed the hell out of someone or they've bashed the hell out of you and they're kind of sitting on your end zone and you feel a little bit powerless, that stalling can feel quite frustrating and not a very fun aspect of the game. But hopefully, as you've seen from the example, depending on the game situation and the teams that are involved, stalling can be a really, really interesting way to play the game. It can create really dynamic situations that require a lot of thought and absolutely a lot of skill to stall successfully. So I hope you're all inspired to go out there and bring this element into your gameplay. Thanks for watching, and see you on the pitch.